Thank you. I love John Cleese. I may not be the right person to follow you because you've had 4 poems about Christmas. Okay, so this is called The Wide Gates of the Lowlands. The closing night of the campus production of The Crucible, we went to Kathy Hickman's party, still in character. The long white wig, the tattered black poncho, the thick gray makeup that made you look hundreds of years old, from the moon and made of ashes. It was the same night they found the body of the sitar player in the hills above the golf course. For years, he'd been performing midnight surgeries in a dark warehouse for anyone who wanted something done so much, it didn't matter if it was done terribly. When it was over, the patient would have to walk up the embankment and across the long, empty parking lot, their body stinging with errors. Then the woozy ride home, the swerve in the stomach, the crude stitches, weak with blood and losing their grip. They found him pretty much in pieces. Dragged apart so far in the darkness, the police ran out of yellow tape at the crime scene. At the party, you tried everything. You even did an impression of the puppet from that sitcom, but Kathy Hickman still wouldn't let you touch her. She sat far away from you on the couch and talked about water skiing and Italy and a guy who was coming home from the Air Force. Later in your dorm room, you watched a metal band on TV play a concert in the Philippines. You stood in the bathroom and scraped the cakey makeup off your face while they played a song about burning Troy to the ground. The makeup fell away in big white clumps that collapsed under the hot water and dissolved in a long gray stream. You looked in the mirror and were relieved to see that you were still young. It was the last time you would ever be that lucky. This is, it's hard being 5'7". Okay, this is a poem that's inspired by the greatest American movie ever made, Jaws. It's called Dead Surfers and Distant Seconds. The rock climber loves the girl whose boyfriend was killed by a shark. But no matter what he does, he'll always be in second place to the dead surfer who, in his last seconds, stumbled through the waves and back to the beach, blood surging from his side, just to say goodbye to her. Nothing can top that. But he keeps trying anyway. He tells her about sleeping on the side of a mountain, falling 50 feet into a jagged city of rocks, and how one time his knee exploded into so many pieces, surgeons needed to bring in books to remember what it was supposed to look like. She tells him she's glad he's alive, and falls asleep with her head on his chest in a way that feels patronizing. He feels his climbing scars glowing in embarrassment. No trial will ever be enough if later he's able to stand around at a party and say, it was night, it was freezing, I had to hold my head together with a bungee cord. But he knows the real problem is that he's lived too long. All he can do is imagine the dead boyfriend and the shark missing each other by miles. He pictures him walking unharmed from the water, sticking his board in the sand and lying down next to her. He says stupid things about the waves and the weather while she nods and reads a book about a blue wolf in an Arctic town. If only he had lived, he would have been powerless, and everyone else would have had a chance. Always before the Olympics, when you watch an event, they have these little vignettes about people, and suddenly they're really compelling, and suddenly you're like, rooting for the Russian, or siding with the Canadian because this is kind of about that. So, it's called Rescuers Requiem. At the Olympics in London, the swimmer who lived up the street stood on the blocks in a black suit and goggles. His body had rows of muscles like the kind you saw on the backs of jaguars in nature documentaries. It made you wish you had spent time getting great at something. Your city had stood still for him all summer, Hardware stores and high schools were covered in banners. There were parades with marching bands and girls throwing batons through fire, and the coffee shop named a latte after him. You were supposed to want him to win, but before the race, the profile of the guy from Belgium, whose house had burned down, was too compelling for you to take sides too quickly. His dad had fallen asleep smoking, and the house went up in flames. Luckily, everyone escaped. The clip ended with the swimmer and his father talking about healing and starting over while passing a puppy between them. There were other stories too. The Canadian whose bad heart was due to explode before he turned 30. The Russian orphan who had witnessed a murder. The guy from France who was blind in one eye. But when they jumped from the blocks and started slicing through the water, you couldn't tell them apart. The Belgian with the burning house, the Canadian with the hourglass heart, the local Olympian who had gotten your sister and her best friend pregnant within a week of each other. You held your breath and felt stupid about the ways you planned to be famous. Playing drums for the young murder executives, escaping from handcuffs underwater surrounded by sharks, or stealing your brother's girlfriend, driving to another state, and writing a screenplay about how when you're madly in love, you'll destroy anyone. But suddenly, all you wanted was to live through a horrible disaster, and from your newly furnished apartment, talk about starting over on national television. You wanted to stare into the interviewer's eyes and say, after the explosion, I became the fastest man in the world. And this last one, thanks for listening, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. So I used to work for a metal radio station in high school. It was the largest radio station in the country, and we used to have the AP wire. This was back in the 80s, and so it sort of like tap out the news, and there was a horrible accident, and all we knew was that someone in a band had died, and we were waiting to see what band it was, and so we were waiting for like 20 minutes for the information to come and tap it out. So it was Metallica, and this is kind of a little bit about that, and a little bit not about that at all. I'm not sure why I told you guys that. It's called David Naughton at Midnight, Full Moon, etc. Shelley Beecher was so metal, pregnant in 9th grade, smoking on the grass behind the lockers in her Iron Maiden t-shirt. Her boyfriend, Tom Moody, by the way, I use everyone's real name. I feel like someone might be coming after me. He was a senior and he had muscles and a mustache and a car with no muffler that jackhammered across the parking lot every morning. One day in class, he let her copy her Great Expectations quiz, and after that, you never saw her again. It didn't take long for Tom Moody to get a new girlfriend. She was blonde and wore dresses with skulls on them, and when they kissed against his locker, she put both hands on his face. You hoped she would destroy him quickly. The night the moon did something it does every 3,000 years, all the members of a famous hard rock band were killed when their tour bus flew off the freeway and exploded in an empty field behind a miniature golf course. On the news, smoke tumbled from the twisted knots of scattered fuselage, and firemen ran relays with hoses around giant burning dragons. Paramedics knelt over bodies as policemen took notes, and the cameraman trained his lens on a tennis shoe in the bushes. Behind the reporter, a girl in a bikini with wet black eyes emerged from a patch of smoking debris to wander in circles in the ash. A few hours later, while cleaning your parents' pool, you pulled a mouse from the drain and set it down in the grass. Crushed by the press of water, it gasped and steadied itself in the moonlight. You wanted it to dart back into the night, but it didn't. It just stared straight ahead, like it was waiting for you to do the same thing. You still can't remember who moved first. Thank you.